Hello, I'm Greg. I'm the creator of Superhero Coding, and today we're going to answer the question, how do you know when you've hit something? And in real life, that's usually pretty obvious, but if you're in Unity, you got to write a little bit of code and find out what you hit. You know, it's kind of like stumbling around in the dark. You want to know what you just stepped on. So today is going to be primarily about colliders. We're going to pick up where we left off. So last week's lesson is on YouTube. You can catch it there. Gonna jump right in. Alrighty. So this is where we left off. Real quick, I want to show you something cool. So if you're new to Unity, and you may be, all these things are game objects. So all the different items in the scene are game objects, and each game object is made up of components. Now, I talk about this a lot in my, making a game from scratch in Unity 2020 playlist. Check that out if you're not familiar, at least the first 2 or 3 videos. These are all game objects, and they're all made up of components. One of the coolest parts of Unity, so like this camera is a game object with a transform component and a camera component. This directional light is a game object with a transform component and a light component. The light component is what makes it a light. The camera component is what makes it a light. I could remove this camera component, add a light component. Now it's a light. So what's really cool about this, though, is you can make your own components. Well, 2 things. You can make your own components, like this spacebar to jump script, and you can also, the other component that we've already made is this move and wrap script that will read and manipulate the values in the transform component. And just to review that code real quick, we are getting the game object transform local position, and we're checking it. If the X is higher than the max, we want to go to the min. If it's less than the min, we want to go to the max. And then we set game object transform local position. Game object with a lowercase g always applies to the game object that the script is currently applied to. And you saw that last week with these barriers. They all have the same script, and I showed you how we can change the move speed, things like that. Real quick. If I grab this sphere and I copy it with Control-C or Command-C on the Mac, I go to this camera, I new scene, I paste it in. Let's say I want to make a floor. I want to make a cube. I always like cubes for floors because if you're doing physics stuff can get wonky with if you're doing just a plane or a quad as your floor, it can fall through. It's just more reliable to use cube. I don't think it's computationally more expensive. But anyway, this is kind of fun. So if I hit space, we're going to get what we had before. I hit play, I hit space, we've got the cube that jumps, right? And each time I hit space bar, it jumps, so to speak, by adding jump force, the amount we specify, in the Y direction, the up direction, every time we hit spacebar. But again, current game object that the component is attached to. Get component, get the rigid body. And so it's getting the rigid body for the sphere, and it's adding to it. What's cool, though, is if you make several of these, you make several of them where they are, then they push each other out. If I make over here like this, there, but if I take all of these and I give them different jump values, it's got 200, it's got 500, 100, 50. Now when I hit play, the script is going to activate on all of them. If I hit the spacebar once, they all jump that different amount. So you can get some fun stuff, and you can set it so that, I mean, right now, if I keep hitting spacebar, they'll keep going up. You can check the Y distance on an object and see and say, oh, okay, if the Y is, less than 0, then jump again or whatever. It's kind of a fun aside. I don't think it's even worth keeping. Well, I'll save it anyway. Sphere jumping. Let's jump back into the game. So here's where we left off. If I hit space, we get kind of a Flappy Bird kind of a game. Not too hard, not too easy. Since I've spaced things out a little bit. Not the best Flappy Bird game. Maybe the speed should change over time. Pattern here is pretty regular. But what we want to know is we want to know if it collides with the floor. We want to know if it collides with one of the other objects. Well, right now it won't because it's actually in 3D space, and so the sphere is not hitting any of those things. We actually move it over. We are going to have some collisions. It's going to knock it because these barriers have colliders on them, and the sphere has collider on it. So colliders and triggers. You use a trigger when you want to move through something and not have it kind of knock back. So you definitely want colliders sometimes because sometimes you want things to hit. Example, if you're making a pool game, when those balls hit together, you want a collision to happen. You want the force and the velocity and all that stuff of one to transfer to the other and to move. If we're just checking to see what's happened, usually we want to use a trigger. So what I will do, I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to type in barrier and grab not that, but all the rest of them and pick is trigger. Clear that back out. So now all of these are set to be triggers. The other thing I need to do is I need to make sure that my sphere is in line with else. Just to make sure, and I'm going to just click this to get that exact view, an orthographic. Yep, that is at the point where it should be colliding with things. So when this hits those, when the player, the yellow sphere, hits the green barriers, it's going to register as a trigger. Now we need code to look for that. So this is our spacebar to jump code. We should probably just go ahead and make that the player code. So again, I'm teaching the series the way that I like to do things, and this is a battle-tested way of doing things. I've been doing Unity stuff for a long time, a lot of successful projects. So this may not be best coding practice, but this is a very valid real-world practice. I'm going to keep spacebar to jump because I like that script. Might want it for something else later. And the other thing, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to duplicate this script and I'm going to rename it. The other thing that'll do though is that will keep the spacebar to jump in these early scripts, in these early scenes as is. So I'm going to go ahead and select that, Control D on a PC, Command D on a Mac. Now it's going to have some problems, spit out some errors if I try to run this because we've already got one called spacebar to jump. I'm going to call this Flappy Player. Rename that. Now there's a different set of problems because your script name has to match the class name. So let's fix that. That's a common problem. So this name has to match that one exactly. Now it's like, oh, there's already one called spacebar to jump. I could do that. That looks like it'll work. It won't. It'll still cause problems over here because the class name does not match the file name. It would cause problems when you try to run it and use it. So I'm going to go ahead and call it Flappy Player. So I duplicated the script. I renamed the file. I renamed the class. At that point, this is a completely separate class. We still got spacebar to jump. We're going to keep that. And we've now got Flappy Player. So what we want to do is do void, and we are going to use a script called onTriggerEnter. So when I start typing, IntelliSense is what pops up the options here. If you're not getting this, your Visual Studio is not configured right. There are three kind of key items: onTriggerEnter, onTriggerExit, and onTriggerStay. You've also got the 2D versions of each one. Of course, we're doing 3D, so we want onTriggerEnter. And it says collider other. And what we can do, we'll do debug log statement. I don't really attach to Unity and debug dynamically like that with breakpoints and stuff. I am old school where you print out all the stuff. I've also had issues with attaching to Unity and debugging and stuff like that. It just seems like it's more trouble than it's worth. I like debug logs. I can put a bunch of them in there. I can comment them out. I can put in, a lot of times I'll do a debug on Boolean, and then after my statements down here, I can say if debug on and put that in front of all of them, and then I can public bool, it's a Boolean, shouldn't talk and type at the same time apparently. Public, meaning it shows up in the inspector. Bool, Boolean, true, false, yes, no. Variable type, variable name, assign a default value. Especially if you're adding it to a bunch of existing scripts, it's good to put in a default value. Now, every time this is added to a new object, or if it was already on 80 objects, it's got a default value. That's important. And sometimes I want it here. You don't want to assign it in start. Sometimes you will want to assign it in start if you never want it to debug. But there might be certain objects. I'll do this, and then if I'm having trouble with this object, I'll go and I'll click that flag on. I'll go ahead and leave that in. That's useful. It's off by default. I can turn it on if I want to see what the script is doing because it's not doing what I thought it should be. So anyway, onTriggerEnter, collider other, debug log. We want to say we just hit and other, which is a reference to this, dot name. And so that is going to give us the name of the trigger that we hit if debug on is true. Oh, I'll show you. I guess having lots of debug log statements is the other reason that I like having my console visible all the time. Again, this is the way Unity was originally set up. I think it's a much better way. I kind of get that the hierarchy is next to the scene, and that makes sense, but I think picking something from the hierarchy on this side of the page and then having to deal with something over here in the inspector does not make sense. I had students very confused. It makes more sense. I click this and this changes. I click this and this changes, rather than I click something over here and something on the opposite side of the whole screen changes. But anyway, digress. So I'm going to save. I'm going to hit play. And then we should be registering collisions, but we're not going to say anything unless our debug script is on. And it's not, because we've still got spacebar to jump on here. All right, I'm going to show you a cool trick. I'm told this is not recommended, but again, it doesn't hurt anything. It's fine. You do it. It's a handy tip. So what I'm going to do, you used to just be able to drag a new script into here. Say, I want to replace that one with this one. Doesn't work anymore unless you go into debug mode. Now, if you've never turned your whole inspector into debug mode, there's a whole bunch more stuff in there than there is otherwise. It all changes. But what you can do now is I can take my Flappy player and put it right there and replace spacebar to jump. And then come out of debug mode. Now the benefit is that jump force that's set at 300 did not change. That's not the default value. That's the value that was assigned in there. So if you've got variables, and if you start with one script and make another one, it'll be very, very, very handy. So it was not triggering collisions. It was also not outputting them because I didn't have debug on. Now I'm going to have debug on. All right, we just hit an upper barrier. Oh, we just hit an upper barrier. Now we're going to hit lower barriers. Upper barriers. I don't have the top and bottom set as triggers. I could, but let me show you. As soon as I click that this is a trigger, that sphere is going to drop through the floor because triggers do not collide. They do not stop things from happening. And so it did show up that we just hit floor, but it's not going to stop it. So what in the real world, when it's in the game, when they hit the floor, they're dead. So, I could change that to be a trigger, and when you hit floor, you're dead. And I would probably leave ceiling as is. I would just turn off the mesh renderer so you can't see it. But it still would prevent you, because it's a collider, not a trigger. It would still prevent you from going up too high. Doing pretty good on time. All right, so I think what I want to do here is, I'm that back on because I don't like the shadows as is. So in the original game, when you hit a barrier, game is over. Why? Because he wanted to show you an ad. That's it. At its simplest level, that's it. So implementing lives, not too difficult. We're going to get into more of a game manager state next session. But this one I really want to focus on the triggers. So I want to focus on, we hit a barrier and that's bad. And I guess I could do lives. Hitting a barrier, you lose 1 life. Hitting a floor, you lose all the lives. The other fun thing though is, if you make it through, then they ought to get a point, right? So what we can do, so let's say what I can do, it's easier. What I'm trying to avoid is having to go through and move something manually to all 9 of these. It's really not a big deal. All right, one thing at a time. All right, I'm going to save. I'm actually going to go ahead and Control-Shift-S and save out to a scene 04. Do that. Clear that. Let me go back here. I'm going to leave that on because we're going to be hitting different things, and I want to know what I'm hitting. Because you always want to know if it's doing what you think it's doing. If it's doing what you think it's supposed to be doing. Computers will do what you tell them to, not what you want necessarily. There can be a difference. So that's an important thing to bear in mind. More information is good, especially if I'm getting too much. I uncheck that, and then I'm not. Right. Let's just make sure everything's going good. Cool. All right. All right. Let's keep going. Camera's been being weird. All right. So, first thing I want to do is I want to check. So you can do collision layers and tags and stuff like that, and that's a good idea if you've got a lot of stuff. If you've just got a little bit of stuff, it's not that big of a deal if you just check the name. So we're going to make a string called let's call it name of object we hit equals other dot name. So of course now we can just say, hey, we just hit blah blah blah. And then we're probably going to want to do some different things. So we can start out by saying if name of object we hit. So now when I hit this, because this is a string, we're going to use some things from the string class. So rather than saying if the name is lower barrier or lower barrier parentheses 1 parentheses barrier, upper barrier or whatever, we can do if it contains barrier. Because if I want to test it, I can type that in here, and that's going to filter to everything in the scene that has it. This is included, doesn't have any colliders on it that are set as triggers, so it does not matter. Kill that. Name of object we hit contains barrier, debug log error. Game over. So yeah, everybody knows debug log. You can also do debug log warning, debug log error. It's not a good idea to debug log error and when it's not an error, but I'll fix that in a minute. And you can also do let's do this. Bug.break. All right. So I'm here. I hit play. Oh, that's it. Game over. Game over. And what we could do, since we are in the player script, is we could turn this off. We can say, it doesn't need to be a public. Private is implied, don't need that. Bool. Is game running equals true. Actually, this is a good example of set this to true when we run. Is game running equals true. Hit the space bar. So we can check here, or we could actually check above this before we even check to see if they're hitting the space bar. Let's just do that. If is game running equals false, game is over, so we're doing nothing. Actually, we don't want that because update runs and that'll show up a ton. But there's our if debug on to the rescue right there. Else, put everything else inside of that else statement. Because if the game is not running, we don't want to take any input. So that we'll say is game running equals false. Now, if you're not familiar with programming, this can trip you up. One equal sign is assigning a value. We're assigning the value of false to is game running. Two equal signs is a check we are checking to see if the value of is game running is false. Why we use a 1 equal sign here, and to done my job right. So we come over here, we hit play. And then once I run into a barrier, it's going to stop accepting my input. Yep, that was quick. All right. That again. Oh, done. You know, spoiler alert, I was not very good at Flappy Bird. Anyway, but you get the idea. And we could even like destroy the player, destroy the game object, and so it would go away. And things just keep moving. Games in the 80s would do that sometimes. So if we hit a barrier, game's over, right? The other thing I want to do though is what we can do player lives, and we can do a score. So let's do public int score, player score equals 0. It's fine, and I'm going to also initialize it there. It's in start, because eventually all this might get moved. Some of it, like these things, might get moved into a separate thing that says, okay, let's start the game. If we have a start button, we hit the game, or they want to play again, you would move this out of start into its own routine called do game start stuff or something. This would stay in start because you want it to run once. These would get moved to game start stuff. Player score equals 0, and what I want to do is let's get to the first one. Okay, so I'm going to duplicate the upper barrier. I'm going to move it down. I'm going to move it back a tiny bit. I'm going to make it thinner. I'm going to make it, yep, that's fine. I'm going to make it blue or something, or yellow. Doesn't matter, because eventually I'm going to make it where it's not visible at all. I'm just going to call this point wall. Doesn't matter. Everything else is the same. I still want it to have the mesh renderer. The box collider is trigger. But what we'll do is over here, name of object we hit contains barrier. Over. If name of object we hit contains point, then player score equals player score plus 1. People who do programming will know what was that? That's the long way. The short way is player score plus plus, but it's the same thing. Player score plus plus means player score equals player score plus 1. So that will update that, and then we can debug log. Player score is now player score. So if we make it through this one, we will get a point. Let's try that out. I'm trying to suck at games so much that I lose. Hey, look, I got a point. I got a point as I was dying. Try that again. I should have made something I'd be better at. All right, we got a point. Not very good at the game. Now, to be fair, it's a little bit tricky, because by the time you hit play, you get some lag, blah, blah, blah. This one up a little bit, so my game isn't quite as sad. All right, so I'm going to duplicate point wall and move it. I mean, technically, since these are all moving at the same speed, I could just put it like I could put them all in the same place. I could put them all in the same object, but whatever. We're going to do that. I'm going to just, I mean, for now, I'm just going to do it like this. This is not great. I ought to have these with their individual. Well, I'll do that. That is there. So this guy there. Part of that. This one will be that one. Close enough. All right. And maybe my sphere is jumping a little too much. So I'm going to put 250. See if I can do any better at all. Hey, look at that. If I had all these other point things going up, then I'd be getting more points. But look, I'm getting more points. So, that's another thing too. You're going to end up testing your own game a lot. You're going to end up playing your own game a lot. You're going to end up, oh, game's over. You're going to end up sick of your own game because you played it so much. What's my final score there? Score. Yeah, I got 12 points. So that is that's collisions and triggers. It's good ones and bad ones. Hitting the barrier are bad collisions, and hitting the others are good collisions. Head and finish out these. Let's see. What else do we need to have in this lesson? I guess this is probably pretty good. Go back here. We go there. This has been a little bit shorter than the last one, but they don't have to be super long. All right. Let's do one more thing. Let's put the lives in here. Let's give the player 3 lives. And once all 3 lives are gone, then you're out of luck. So I'm not going to display it. I'm going to display it and everything with the UI. That's going to be in the next session. Right now, everything kind of happens in the console. This is okay, because right now we're the only ones playing it. I mean, regular player doesn't see all this, but right now we're just kind of testing it to get it working like we want. So you know what? 300 made it a little too hard. 250 makes it a lot easier for old guys like me. So let's add player lives. Before we do that, I want to talk to you for a moment about superherocoding.com. If you want to follow along and do everything I'm doing and type it all in yourself, you are free to do that. If you want to get my code, my assets, the first week is always free. Weeks 2, 3, and 4 for all my code and all my assets, and I do have an artist that will be creating some assets for some of the things in the future. That is available for $30 a month, for $30, not per month, $30 for that month's code. And then you get updates to this project forever, until the end of the month. Well, no, you get updates forever. It's $30 during the current month. When the month ends, price doubles, because I want people who want to take action. I don't want people to just collect these and never get to them either. I want people to be following along. I want people to if you want the code and the art that I'm making and providing, rather than typing it all in yourself. First week's free for everybody if you sign up on the email list. Weeks 2, 3, and 4, and 5, if it's a weird month, is $30 for that month's project. But now, if I come back in 6 months and update this Flappy game from October 2023, you will still get the updates. You'll always get the updates for the month that you bought. But the price goes up for everybody who didn't buy it at the end of the month. That's how it works. Now back to our regularly scheduled Flappy game. So, again, superherocoding.com. That is the place for you to learn a superpower. All right, player lives, 3 lives. I know the original Flappy Bird didn't have 3 lives. I don't care. I do like, I played a lot of arcade games that were one and done. You mess up, you die. And I do enjoy that sometimes, but I want this Flappy Bird, for the sake of learning, I want the player to have 3 lives. So I'm going to, again, I'll make it a public, and I'll probably make some of these private. If you're the only one doing it, doesn't matter. It really, really doesn't. And I think it's easier to see it on the screen. Public, int, player lives. I will go ahead and initialize it there. Copy that. And again, put that in here. It doesn't need the int because we defined it up here. Player lives equals 3. So now we got to change code a little bit. If the name of object we hit contains barrier, player lives, I could do the minus minus thing, because that, again, that's player lives equals player lives minus 1. But I'm going to be a little bit longer with it because I think that is clearer. Deduct 1 from player lives. Now we need to see if player lives is at 0. If player lives equals 0, then we say game over. Otherwise, we keep going. Debug log. You lost a life. Only player lives. Player lives. Come on. Lives left. All right. Yeah. All right. Again, all the good stuff happens in the console. Next session will be about the user interface. So I want to keep going. I already lost a life. I'm still going. Only 1 life left. 1 life to live. It was a soap opera back in the 80s, I think. Still going, still racking up some points. I mean, it's interesting. Some have points and some don't, you know. And you could do this. You could set it so that they had a point value. That could be a difference. That, a really hard one. Or maybe there's 2 openings here. One of them has a point value and one of them doesn't. Or one of them, has a much higher point value than the other one. All right, I'm going to go ahead. I hit a barrier. So if I look up live, so I type that in here, and I'm going to see it. Only -5 lives left. I think that happened. Find out after. Yeah, the game is over. So okay, because it should be that once we were at 0 lives, game finished. Done. Hit the upper barrier. Game over. So all those other player lives notes should be down here where we're in a -1 and stuff like that. Yep. Okay. Yeah. So while it's falling, and so you could put in code here. It's fine. You lost a life. All right. So you can do, if player lives is less than 1, that would work too. That wouldn't keep subtracting them. Well, I guess it It doesn't matter. All right, I believe it. Less than 1, game over. All right. Let's see. What else do we want to do? I want to add the score barrier to these last few pieces. So, as a point wall, it's in the wrong place. So just gonna here. Got a barrier with a point wall, point wall, point wall. Okay, that one has point wall in the wrong place. That one does not, so I'm gonna duplicate it. That over, move it up. I'm just using my arrow keys just to check everything out. So that's got a point wall, that's got a point wall, no point wall. Okay. Duplicate, move down, squish, about here. Yellow if I want. And here. Call it point wall. Good. All right, 3 more. Watch this. Let's just do it to all 3 of them at once. Duplicate down. See it duplicated inside of each one. I squish the X back a little bit. Probably should have just done that in the beginning. Point wall, and just like that. Oh, that up. Pause. These all need to be. Oh no, I didn't mess it up. They're all triggers. Grab all of them. Make sure they are yellow. Go. Save that. Go over here. Hit play one more time. Now all the barriers have the point walls. And now it's a lot easier to play. And you could change that too. You could make it where the game starts getting harder. I like the idea of there's a second place where you have to 2, 1, and then we're done. Yeah, that time 2 lives, we have 1 life, and we're done. I like the idea of there's a second opening somewhere that has more points, it's worth more, that makes the player want to try to go for that. And that's a thing. You can, this is a flappy type game. This is a great introduction. It's not a ton of code. And you've seen what we've done already. So this one now with lots of spaces and comments, 76 lines of code, and this one's still 33. So, we're still at like 100 lines of code that we're actually using, because we're not using that one in there, or maybe 150 total. And it's practically Flappy Bird. It almost is. So, and so many of these games, they're just not as difficult as you think they are. They're not as complicated. I mean, yeah, if you want to build Fortnite, you want to build Minecraft as your first game, that's complicated. Call of Duty, any of them, that's complicated. But that's why this is a good place to start. In next month's sessions, probably going to do a Galaga type game. A friend of mine who's an artist, he and I are going to get in VR. We're going to sculpt a cool looking boss. We're going to sculpt a cool looking ship and work with that. So I think that'll be cool. We're going to record those sessions too and bring those up. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you've learned something.